Okay, so you guys filled out the attendance form and we had a chance to do that Ed puzzle. So we will move on. So yesterday we discussed the Paleolithic era and the Neolithic Revolution, what changed as a result of that. And now we're going to have a discussion about, um, what are the characteristics of a civilization? In other words, what is the difference between a bunch of people just living in one place and something that we could actually point to and say, okay, that's a true civilization? So, what must that group of people have in order to be considered a civilization? That's kind of what we're going to be talking about. Okay, so first, a couple of vocab words. I will give you a moment. Okay, so while everyone finishes up, some important vocab to consider. When we say civilization, what exactly does that mean? In this particular case, we're going to use the word civilization to refer to a complex society in which a large number of people share several common elements. Now, shared common elements is essentially culture, okay? Culture can be defined for our purposes as the beliefs, customs, arts, technology, etc. of a particular society, group, place, or time. So the thing about culture, I just wanted to make this clarification, is when we're talking about a particular society, group, place, or time, the word culture can be used in reference to a lot of different things. So we could talk about American culture. That's a particular society, right? Or a group within that society. The culture of American adolescence. Okay. Uh, the culture of American adolescence in cities. Okay. They have their own particular culture. The culture of adolescence in America in cities during the 1960s. So now you can see how we can kind of continue to narrow the scope, and we could just say, or we could just say the culture of the 1960s or the culture of teens. Okay. So we can use the word culture in reference to all of those things. So it's important to kind of understand exactly what that word means and how it's going to be used going forward. So we could talk about culture in general of a society, or we could talk about culture of subgroups of that society. That's essentially what we're getting at. Okay, there's only one more slide today, so here we go. Okay, so this topic is addressed in almost every global studies class, and different global studies teachers kind of address this issue differently as far as what are the characteristics of a civilization. For our purposes, we will use six characteristics of a civilization. So other people in other classes might use eight or five, but six is the number that we will use. So what we're saying essentially is that true civilizations have to have these six things. So, in order for a group of people to be considered a true civilization, they must have all of the following things: permanent cities. So, this is where we think of dense population centers, okay? Places where people live relatively close together to each other. People just dispersed throughout the countryside are hard to kind of consider a civilization because they could exist independent of each other in little pods. They might not have a ton in common. But the closer people to get to each other, the more likely it is that they have things in common, and also infrastructure. So the cities, when we think of cities, we think of buildings and roads and sidewalks and things like that. So it has to have all of those things in order to be considered a permanent city. And if it's a true civilization, it should have permanent cities. Number two, political systems in government. There needs to be some type of leadership and or laws in some way that govern the people, essentially rules or rule makers. Religion can be a lot of different things. People can say, can kind of worship the river because it's this, the source of life, or the sun. Those are, that's a religion, some kind of element of religion. A writing system. They have to have some way of communicating and keeping records. So, whatever that may be in the form of shapes or different things. I know, Native Americans used wampum, for example, or, some way to keep track of things is a writing system is something you should have. A social system. So, are there different classes? how are those classes of people separated? Is it ruling class and everyone else? Is it the rich and the poor? Is it, whatever distinctions they're making between classes of people? But typically in a society, in a true civilization, you see different classes or some kind of social system. And last but not least, art. Every civilization should have some element of art. So something that they're either creating, or or music or dance or poetry, or something like that, or even just cave art. That's evidence of a civilization. So these are the six things that we will use. The argument that we can get rid of one or more of these things, and that group of people should still be considered a civilization that is relatively sophisticated. Okay. So that's kind of what I'm asking you to think about. So essentially, what we're going to do here is if we jump over to the classwork page, AIM 2.3 here, and go to the exit slip. Okay, the exit slip is really just two questions today. So the first question is, of these six characteristics we've discussed, which characteristic do you think is most critical for civilization to possess? So in other words, we said there's six things. What is the single most important thing that all civilizations must have? Like, if you can get rid of five of them and just keep one, which one would you choose? And so which thing is really the hallmark of a civilization? In other words, which one is most important to have? I'm going to ask you to choose one of those and explain why you're choosing that one. And I'm going to ask you to explain in 3 or more complete sentences. And then number 2, of the 6 characteristics we've discussed, which do you think is least important for a civilization to have? In other words, which of those 6 could we get rid of, and we could still consider that group of people a civilization? And I'm going to ask you to explain your choice in 3 or more sentences for that one also. So it's really just these 2 questions that I want to consider going forward. I'd just like you to think critically about this list that we've put out of 6.